Jim Stockdale interview, take 3.
Okay. Okay.
Patrick, could I just get something down that I think
sure.
may or may not be of use,
Please.
but that you may.
Absolutely.
I think I'm involved in this project because of my time with my father and understanding and having edited a great deal of his work, and my lifetime as a teacher. Bringing these two worlds together is important, but nothing is more important than young men and women entering the military, finding my father's story or the story of hundreds of other prisoners to be something that strikes them as an example they would like to illuminate. What Dad would want you to know is that he was just like you. There's no magic fairy dust in this story. He was an insecure midshipman who arrived from the Midwest hoping to do well. He made friends there, and he had lots of questions about how he would do when the time came for him to show his courage. He went through a career in naval aviation that was fraught with difficulty, and he had moments when he had to serve commanding officers who were less than encouraging. Dad would want you to know that what you are experiencing now is what he experienced, and that by showing early signs of ethical behavior, by standing up for what is right, and by doing what you can to reinforce healthy leadership among your comrades is the most important thing you can do. Integrity, ethical behavior, is a muscle, and it needs exercise. Don't think that when the time comes and you get into the big game or the situation where you're going to be tested, that you can all of a sudden develop heroic capabilities. That's not true. Dad became the officer he became by gradually and daily exercising ethics, reflecting upon himself, being loyal to his family and his country, and by doing the right thing. If you have any question about whether or not you have the capacity to become Jim Stockdale or any of the other men he was so proud to serve, the answer is yes. You can do that, and you can do it here at the Naval Academy, and you can do it with your classmates by doing the right thing every time, every day. This series is about straight from the shoulder communication, speaking honestly in a time when integrity seems to be under siege. I ask that you watch these clips and understand that these men have been through trial and tribulation. They want to share their experience with you. They are men you can look up to, but they were just like you. Is that okay?
Wow.
Out of the ballpark.
I'm telling you.
We can go home now.
Yeah, I know. I just lost a job because filmmaking now goes right over to you. That was
Well,
perfectly done.
I didn't want to.
Can you drive a minivan? Let's go.
You know what I'd like to add to this?
Sure.
Because it meant a lot to me
Mhm.
when I went to the Naval Academy Cemetery on the hill overlooking Severn and I saw your father's tombstone.
Mhm.
In fact, we filmed a whole sequence of one of the spots we did at that tombstone because we wanted people, young midshipmen, to go there and see that and stand there and
Mhm.
think about your dad. And John McCain has now been
Right, buried next to his good friend. I think Ross may have bought those tombstones as well. They have an uncanny resemblance.
So would you mind tying it into that? Like when you say you're speaking directly to the midshipmen, because in a way I'd like to say to them, go walk up there and stand there for a
I
moment.
can do that, sure.
Yeah.
Will you give him a sec?
And among the many other great men who were buried as
Yeah,
well.
yeah.
That's part of the legacy that we're doing here, is we're remembering.
As a midshipman, you face challenges every day, and sometimes those challenges may seem overwhelming. You will wonder if you're good enough. You will wonder if you're going to make it through the program. You will wonder how to choose a field in which you can excel later. Sometimes the world tends to close in on you here at the Naval Academy as readily as it closes in on every young person as they start a career. Let me invite you to take a walk. Leave Bancroft Hall, walk up to the Naval Academy. Leave Bancroft Hall, walk up to the Naval Academy Cemetery across the bridge, and feel free to go and have a talk with Dad. He's right there at the crest of the hill as you come up to the cemetery. He's there next to the love of his life, Sybil. He's right there at the crest of the hill, buried with the love of his life, Sybil. And he's buried right next to his best friend, Bill Crow. The two of them became friends here at the Naval Academy. When Dad arrived on campus, and his father had driven him from Illinois for the swearing-in ceremony, he and his father, Vernon, who would be very appreciative we're filming this in the barn, he and Vernon went to a coffee shop, and a lanky young man arrived and went and sat on the stool at the counter. Grandfather Stockdale never met a stranger and was always friendly, and he went over to the young man and he said, "Are you here to join the ranks of those being sworn in at the Naval Academy?" And the young man said yes and explained that his name was Bill Crow, that he had taken the train from Oklahoma, and that he was alone for the morning before he went over and spent his first day on the yard. These two, maybe this is too much. These two men never had any idea that they would someday, as best friends, be buried with their wives next to one another. And they had no idea that they would rise to the level of qualification and of prominence that they did. But there they are together, two kids from the Midwest, one a Medal of Honor winner who had spent a considerable amount of time in a foreign prison, and the other who became the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And now they rest together at the cemetery. When you're having a hard day, go up and visit those guys, because they will want to hear from you. Go up and talk to them about your troubles. Tell them that they can help you. And I feel sure that in the fresh air along the Severn, you'll find some relief that these men who were just like you when they were young also had trials and tribulations, and they just put one foot in front of the other and kept going with the best values that their families and our country had given them.
Beautiful.
Sort of.
Well,
Sort of a thing. I don't know. Overworked.
okay, so let's zero in on unity over self for a moment, because I think it's one of the things by which your father inspired others, but also by which your father came to be inspired. That the thing that we lead others with, we have to find ourselves first. Talk to me about that evolution as you understand it as his son, in any kind of stories he shared with you or what you've come to know. Because it's a bedrock of.
Yeah, it's a powerful element. Unity over self involved sacrifice for the greater good, but it also involved just pairs of prisoners teaming up to accomplish the same purpose. Jerry Denton and Dad were in the same class at the Naval Academy. They were only a few numbers apart upon graduation, and yet they both found themselves in prison, and they developed what they called a blue and gold system. They were the epitome of unity over self. When one went down or went into solitary confinement, the other took over, especially in those early years in prison. Unity over self can be a pair of people, it can be a cell block, it can be a dormitory, it can be any place where men who are trained in the military tradition live together. Unity over self means that you are always trying to find ways to help those around you to be the best people they can be. It is I have to pause here. Unity over self is more than selflessness. It is taking the initiative. It is finding a way to encourage others, finding a way to help them, even at times when they may not think that they need reassurance. Unity over self is what binds fighting men together. As important as duty and honor to country is in the conduct of one's duty, when in combat, your allegiance and your affection for the man next door is what motivates you. Knowing that someone else is going through the same trials and tribulations, and that you seek for that person the same strength that you would wish for in yourself, is the most resonant and powerful commodity that you can develop as a person and that you can share with those with whom you're serving.
There's a story.
To end a sentence with a gerund, sorry.
Only a school teacher would say, that means that's what a gerund. The rest of us would have to look up.
It's probably not even a gerund, I don't know, but it sounds like one.
There is a story recounted in Defiant. Your father is quoted to have recounted, where at a certain point there was a purge, the Stockdale Purge. They were going after finding out who was in the lead, who was the leader who was doing all of this. They were after breaking people and revealing, even when they knew it was Stockdale, your dad, they still needed verification and they went after it.
All right.
And they then, when they got clear that it was your dad, they then brought him in for a severe torture session. They broke his leg again. And when he finally had to relent and give them something, they said, we want to know the Central Committee. We want to know and he responded with something that I think is at the essence of revealing what is truly.
Oh, I see. That's a great connection, Patrick. I never thought of that. Okay, let me give it a shot. There were several prisons in North Vietnam. In addition to the well-known wisecrack label for Wallow, the Hanoi Hilton, there were several smaller prisons. Among these was one that the men called Alcatraz. Alcatraz was a set of 13 cells that sat immediately adjacent, across a wall from the back of the National Ministry of Defense in downtown Hanoi. When Dad was confined in Alcatraz with his 11 shipmates, they found the treatment to be extraordinarily severe. Their rations were cut, the tiny cells would get extremely hot, they would develop boils, they had terrible intestinal disorders, and sometimes worms would show themselves and come out of men in ways that horrified them. They were frightened, they were scared, but they remained brave and true to one another. At one point, let me take it a different direction from there. At all times in prison, the men were forbidden to communicate, but through a system of taps on the wall and flash signals under the door, Dad communicated across the courtyard with Nels Tanner, and Nels put Dad's communication out on both walls to go down the longer set of cells so that each man could hear the conversation and contribute to it. Sorry, losing my threads.
We want to get at the.
Yeah, no, I know, the list. I get it. At one point in the discussion, as might be interesting in this series of interviews, one of the connecting young officers between Jeremiah Denton and Dad was a young George Coker. George Coker at one point became so frustrated with the communication back and forth, he would have to tap the communication one way to Denton and Denton's response back through the walls to Stockdale on the other side of the courtyard. At one point, George became so weary of this that he began making up his own series of replies for one officer or the other and wound up tangled in a web and had to confess that he had been doping off and hadn't given them the right language, that the story wasn't making sense or holding together on each end. But George, I shouldn't even include that. That's okay. But he may speak to that. I don't know.
I'm going to ask him that story because I think it's a great story.
But George was very loyal and very caring, and admitted his indiscretion right away and made amends. At one point during the communication that was forbidden, the Vietnamese guards came down with a particularly heavy hand. They were tired of having isolated these, the most obstinate of criminals, as they called them, in a special area where they seemed to gain strength rather than lose it by staying in communication with one another. Dad was then called into a torture session that was obviously the byproduct of a lot of thought that had been given to this in an attempt to break the back of communication in Alcatraz. And he was put in the ropes, and he was left there for long periods of time. His personal torture guard was designated Pig Eye so that he could be recognized from one prisoner to the next. He had sort of a dead eye on he had sort of a gray dead eye that looked off in one direction, and that was the source of his name. Who cares? Sorry. At this point, Pig Eye, with whom Dad was intimately acquainted, his personal torture guard, was training an apprentice. And during the torture sessions, during this particular breakdown, this particular and most difficult purge, the apprentice was asked to take care of Dad's torture. He got the ropes under Dad's leg in a way that they would not ordinarily have been, and re-broke the knee that he had shattered during his ejection and landing in the village of Than Hoa. Dad was there with his knee rebroken, with his spirit dark, all alone, wondering if he was going to survive this excruciating pain in these difficult times. And he was told by the guard who was interrogating him, "We are tired of this communication. We want to know, who is your central committee? Who are the people responsible for communicating? Who passes along the information and makes policy in your group? We know you are communicating against the rules of the prison." And Dad was left with a pencil and paper to try to come up with to try to provide for them in his broken state, the Central Committee. Dad knew about 215 names of prisoners who were in the system by that time, and he proceeded to write down each and every name in the order of rank that he understood on the paper. Later, his interrogator, whose nickname was Rabbit, came in, and Dad said, "There it is. There's the Central Committee. There is no small group that makes the decisions. We are all together. This is a unified group. You take someone out of the chain and the next man goes up. It is unbreakable. It is a chain of men that regulate themselves and that have high expectations for one another." That was the Central Committee. It was everyone in order of rank who was in the prison, everyone who would stick up for one another. And this so frustrated Rabbit that Dad was later removed from that prison and taken to solitary confinement in a different prison.
This is a really important thing.
Does that help?
Yes. We can still encapsulate a little bit more.
Okay, good.
From the communist perspective, which is everything is run by Central Committee, right? There had to be this collective of those who made decisions and those who followed them, right?
Yes.
What your father did that was so remarkable, what all the men in the Hanoi prison systems did, was that they created a virtual leadership. That even if your father had been killed, if Jeremiah Denton had been killed, if whoever was killed, Jim Mulligan, whatever it is, immediately the next in line would replace that, and they would not back us, would still be the letter of the law. And in other words, this thing was an organization in which everyone counted on each other and respected the first question when you were shot down and you tapped through the wall was, after you got your name, was what's your rank, right? So
Sure.
that we could determine who's running
Yeah.
next. If you outrank me, what's your orders?
Yeah.
So it's that military organization, the counting on other, and the efficiency of that I want to get at.
Okay.
Your father was illuminating to these guys who were coming from a totally different mentality. You got to have guys who just are peasants, and then guys who make decisions.
Yeah.
No, he's saying no. We
Yeah.
replace ourselves all the way out. That's an important part of leadership and military efficiency.
Okay.
I'm trying to get at.
Let me try. Let me just cut me off if I'm not getting there. From his studies at Stanford in comparative Marxist thought, Dad understood that the leadership in communist systems was organized hierarchically. There was a very authoritative central committee that made edicts and dictated behavior expectations for the general population. The prison guards were, of course, used to a system in which this was the case, and they tortured Dad to give them the names of his prisoner community central committee. There was no central committee. There were just the prisoners in rank order. Each prisoner filled in for the next. Each prisoner had a number of seniority in the organization, and if number 24 was taken out of the system, number 25 popped up and remained in his place. If the man at the head of the organization was taken out or remained out of communication, number 2 took his place. This carried on all the way down through the system. Dad provoked a great deal of anger when asked for the Central Committee, and he wrote the names of each prisoner in rank order as he understood it and handed it to his interrogators and said, "There is no system like yours in our organization. We are all a part of it, and we all stand ready to move up when someone is removed."
Now, let's draw that to earlier on. You were speaking directly to midshipmen. One of the things to understand here is you may be at the lowest rank in the Navy right now. What you're training to be is to be able to, you may not think, oh, the captain's gonna come down to me and say, take over here. But in point of fact, actually, the USS Fitzgerald is exactly what had to happen. People at the lowest rank, the seamen, had to step in when, So I wanna get this message across that your father so illuminates, and the men and the prisoners of war so illuminate, that the military organization that we aspire to is one where you have not only the responsibility to follow the orders of those above you, you also have the responsibility to train yourself, to educate yourself, like your father did. All the work he did asking the questions about Epictetus prepared him for leadership. That these are young people who are preparing for leadership. And what does that mean? It means at any point in time, you can step into that system. And it is stronger than a central committee, stronger. They could cut off as many heads of the hydras as they want. 2 more are gonna appear. That's the point.
All right. Okay. As midshipman, you're aware that there is a chain of command, and you're aware that your seniority among the brigade is constantly being computed and recomputed. You know that there are men and women who are above you and men and women who likely are below. But no matter how low you fall in that hierarchy, no matter how difficult you find the journey, you should know that the time will come when the person above you may leave and when you have to move up. The strength of the United States military is not in its materiel, it's not in the armaments that we're able to carry. The strength of the United States military is the sense that each man takes his own responsibility seriously, and that he or she is ready to move up at a minute's notice and take charge of a situation when that is required. The fact that each man in the prison organization would go one level up when someone disappeared or was taken into solitary provided an illustration of this strength, and it should be the same strength that you find in the fleet and here in your classes at the Naval Academy.
Perfect. Okay.
I think I did one quick fix.
Okay, do you want me to cut? No?
Yes, sir.
What have we got, hair?
It's
Yeah.
right, yeah, that's good, I got it,
Okay,
thank you.
sure. Thank you, Ken. Marina will want that taken care of.
Okay, hold on, it's still here. It's right next to your eye, so it's,
Do you want me to get some gel?
Kent is just.
You can just pull it out, Ken, if you can grab it.
I'm surprised he hasn't given you a haircut. It's like,
Okay.
there you
Here
go.
we go.
He's gonna cut it.
I have my Gerber tool, I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. I know what that is.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Sure, sure. Thank you.
You're good? You need to take a break? Okay. Let's talk a little bit about your mom. What an amazing, what an amazing woman. And your mother and father wrote a book called In Love and War.
Mhm.
Those two words together, when I think of your father and your mother, those two words are what come to me. You know, they are a history and an evolution of both of those two things. And over the lifetime, I'm sure they would both say we learn more about both of these things as our lives progress than anything else. And you got to be firsthand witness to this.
Mhm.
Your mother, and I think the historic context and all of the things that went on, most people can read about that, so that's not what, it's the things that you can tell us that no one really else can. But in brief, you can sketch the force your mother became and how that evolution happened. And I don't think we need to go into the spy in the Hanoi Hilton and all that stuff.
No.
That's all.
No.
But I think what is important is, like your father, your mother was in a leaderless world in a certain way, that was attempting to say, you be quiet, you've towed the line, and she had to come, and you recount the story of, in conversation with her when she was about to write that letter, and you asked her, what would Dad want you to do?
Mhm.
Right? So this is a really important question. Like, your father had to ask the question, you know, a similar question when he decided to rewrite the code. What would the right thing be to do? Who would ask me to do the right thing? What would Sybil want me to do? What would my sons want me to do? You know, like, the government may have all these rules, but I gotta answer to a higher question than just the government. So, and your mother came through that similar evolution in her own way, right? In working with the questions about her role in bringing to the American public the plight of the POWs. So if we could spend a little bit of time talking about your mom, and I want you to, if you can, at some point, and maybe we'll just cover it as a separate thing, I want to cover a little bit about the POW bracelets, that piece, because I'd love to, if we get a chance, to shoot you down by that bracelet in the town square there, and that would be a good way to just do a voiceover with that. So you think about that. That's why I'm fine.
Okay.
Design.
Well, it's interesting you would bring those two things up together, because Mom and I talked about the bracelets, and at one point I said, what are we doing here? And she said, well, we're gonna, these bracelets are spreading awareness. And I said, it was just, we had differing points of view, and I was frustrated that she was getting over involved. I said, and what are we gonna do with the profits from the bracelets? And she said, well, we're gonna print bumper stickers. And I just became exasperated, and I said, and and but I won't go into that.
Either way, one of the,
Right.
your mother was in fighting a battle, and one of the weapons she
Yeah.
used was the bracelets. So, and that is something that.
Yeah, that's somebody else's thing, so I don't want
No,
to
no,
step
no.
on it. But the bracelets were a fact, and okay,
Yes.
right, yes, a factor, and that
Part of
in
what
right,
your mother and the other women who were marshaling
yes.
the league, would do.
Yes.
Everything from the Rutledge daughter making phone calls, starting with the phone book in Coronado and making phone calls and whatever, whoever told us. Okay.
Yeah, no. I just, you'd say her, I just think about Howie, who was her father. So anyway, he was an amazing guy.
Right. And
I'd rather have syphilis than a naval air station. That's what,
okay.
he didn't want to have command of it, anyway.
Okay, so let's talk about your mom a little bit.
Okay.
I want to sort of trace the parallel of these two warriors.
All right, yeah,
Okay?
sure. Mom was a force in her own right. Just as Dad received his master's from Stanford, and almost simultaneously, Mom received a master's from Stanford in education. She was strong intellectually. She was strong in terms of her sense of what was right and wrong. And she was strong in providing a home for us and centering us on the fact that we were a Navy family. There was never any question about what took priority in our world. It was to support Dad in his career and to serve the Navy and its needs as faithfully as we could. Being a Navy family is rather unique in as much as you're always on the road and you're always looking over your shoulder and trying to figure out what the next chain of command or the next base or the next ship or the next neighborhood may look like. But Mom was strong and she kept us going. When Dad was shot down, Mom was confronted with a series of choices. The Pentagon policy was to forbid family from public discussion of fathers or husbands or partners as prisoners of war, saying that anything that was said publicly could and would be used against the prisoner during interrogations. That's a very intimidating stance. It was put together as suggested behavior for families, but when you're a lieutenant commander or a lieutenant junior grade in the Navy and you receive a Pentagon document labeled suggestions, those are not suggestions. Those are rules that you live by. Mom tried to live by those rules for several years until she finally became frustrated and realized that in her quiet, she believed that she was assisting the forces that had captured Dad, were treating him very badly, and that he and his men were suffering as a result of the American people remaining unaware of their circumstance. If you had asked a man on the street in 1967 about the prisoners being held in Hanoi, he or she would wonder, are there any prisoners being held there? I've never heard about a prisoner in Vietnam. I don't know anything about it. So as time passed, and with the encouragement of Bob Burrows at Naval Intelligence, Mom devised a plan to bring wives and families together to, in some small way, make the plight of their husbands apparent to the public in a way that didn't defy expectations, but that tried to meet them by keeping duty and honor first and foremost. Mom wrote letters of opinion to the editor, was interviewed for various local papers, and became a leader among the wives of those who sought to publicize the prisoners' plight and pressure North Vietnam for more humane treatment of the men. She was powerful, she was strong, and she was committed. She spent time away from us as boys, as brothers, in Washington, D.C. She spent time with other families trying to encourage them to tell their stories so that the public might understand the perilous situation in which their husbands or partners found themselves. I'm losing a little bit here.
Let's focus back on the two words, love and war.
Oh, okay.
How do
All
you
right.
think that your mother and father championed those two concepts together?
Mhm.
as as
Well,
separate?
well, love and war. Mom and Dad certainly loved one another from the very start. Theirs was a very strong and very practical affection and partnership. They were always working for the best one another could provide, and they were partners in parenting as well as partners in life. When Dad would leave and go abroad, Mom was the authority figure in the house, and we were all to understand that. Mom provided a great deal of guidance, and sometimes over-guidance, to her sons as Dad was missing. Theirs was a very strong love that found itself in the midst of war, a war that seemed difficult, a war that seemed dark and different from other wars that had occasioned American military families before. But they needed to navigate the war by having ultimate faith in one another and by knowing that one would want the other to contribute as much as possible. Love and war boiled down to Mom's decision to cooperate with naval intelligence when she was asked. She was taking a great risk, and she took that risk willingly. She and I briefly talked about it, and she explained the dilemma to me as a 16-year-old. My only response was, "What do you think Dad would want you to do?" And that made it obvious to her that Dad would want her to cooperate and to communicate with him in any way that she possibly could that would help him and help his fellow prisoners.
And just so that I can tie that in editorially, in a brief way, just state that, in essence, what you're referring to is that at some point, your mother agreed to send an encoded message.
Oh, okay. I thought I sensed you were guiding me away from that a little bit. Okay.
Just as a brief
Okay,
thing,
sure,
that we
sure,
understand
sure.
that they were both electing this risk together, and they knew that they were in it together.
Yeah.
You know, your dad knew when he deciphered that your mother had chosen to take the risk with him, and he had to let her know, "I'm proud of you too," remember?
Yes,
Yeah.
sure. Well, yeah, sure, I remember. It's okay. No, I understand.
1 second, Patrick.
Okay.
I'm getting a message that says we'll switch slots.
Yeah, it does it automatically, no worries.
It's invisible.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry.
No, it's okay.
I just want to tie the parallel.
Sure.
You know what I'm
Yeah,
saying? Because
yeah.
there's ways in which your dad, in months and years alone, and your mom, in months and years alone, had to evolve similarly and make choices, and involve each other eventually too, in ways that they were two champions and parallel forces. And
Yep. Okay, let me give it a shot here.
And the essence of this, Jim, is, again, we're going back to those midshipmen who think honor is something they don't need to exercise. That, it'll be there when they need it. No, it is this evolution through tough, difficult decision makings. When your life is on the line, when the hair is raising on the back of your neck, when you don't know, it's not an easy choice. If I do this thing, there are huge consequences. That kind of feeling, okay?
I'll do my best,
Okay.
yeah. Mom and Dad's strong bond and their sense of love for one another in a partnership that had endured for years stood them in good stead when the hard questions of imprisonment and family life presented themselves. At one point, Mom was asked if she would participate in a communication operation that involved Dad and involved secret communication and met the broad definition of espionage. This was very risky business that transcended the traditional military role. And Mom and Dad together decided, separated a world apart, and let one another know that they were committed to communication by whatever means possible in a way that benefited Dad and his men and that helped us at home know and understand about their conditions in a more thorough way.
Beautiful.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
I don't know how much. Yeah.
I think you may just
that good?
draw it together by saying their love
Yeah.
in war demonstrates what every person in the military needs to understand, that this is something you come to through great struggle,
Okay.
okay?
Yeah. Their love in war was not meant as an example. It was meant as a way to live their lives that they found had honor and dignity and brought respect to the profession that Dad had chosen and that our family remained dedicated to supporting. Mom and Dad's love was very strong. Their war was very real. Their devotion to one another and their devotion to their duty was all that guided them when the times were darkest, and they agreed together to take risks that other military families needed to consider as time went by. Is that okay?
Perfect.
Okay.
Now, I want to just briefly talk about the POW bracelets.
Sure.
I want to do it in a way that has feeling, because this was your dad. And every day you thought about him, and he was gone. When you went to school, the other kids in your classes didn't think about your dad. Maybe they didn't have dads who were over in Vietnam, or prisoners or whatever. So there was a way in which you were alone in this. Your family was alone in this.
Sure.
When the League did what it did, in all the ways that it did it, including the bracelets, they began to get a response from the public. And people started to wear these things and remember and feel and worry like you were. That had to mean something to your family. It had to mean something to your mom. To walk down the street and see a silver bracelet on someone's arm with a name that that meant, my sister had one of the bracelets and she didn't know who the name was.
Yeah.
She just knew it was important. But these were people to you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just for the record, Patrick, I want you to know that by that time, my personal feelings were more cynical than that. And I know I've conveyed that otherwise. I'll try to do this as well as I can, but I need to, I'm just explaining to you that at that, I had reached a point of personal frustration where it was a wonderful thing. It was a great motivation. It was spectacular in its impact. And
more important for me, it's just a moment of historical
Okay,
moment, and it's
all
a
right.
way I can
Let me-
tie it in visually.
Yep. Okay.
The
Let me.
important thing for me that I'm asking you is to tie yourself into
Yeah.
the feelings.
No, I get that.
There must have been a moment when you realized there are people who are thinking about what I'm going through. I'm thinking about my dad.
Yep. Okay. Being the child of someone imprisoned overseas and enduring very difficult circumstances, carrying the uncertainty about whether or not that person is alive, and if they are alive, wondering how they're being treated, how they're being fed, whether or not they're allowed to get enough rest, how they're being held in captivity, and knowing what you know about portions of their time being in leg irons and hearing at a very young age that they're being tortured is a very lonely experience. Carrying that, as difficult as it was mediated at one point when the nation somehow blossomed in bracelets. When all of a sudden people next to me on the street were wearing a silver token. I guess I'm not that cynical. Were wearing a silver token that indicated some level of shit. Come on, Jim. Come on. That men and women on the street were wearing a silver token that showed their awareness and their caring for men who were being held inhospitably, to say the least, in Hanoi and other regions of Indochina. The names of known prisoners on bracelets would appear in stores at different times. You would see them Men and women would send a donation and get a bracelet of someone who was thought to be a prisoner and wear it and have it with them always. And that in many ways showed my family and others that there were Americans, even Americans who may have been against the war generically, but who cared about America's prisoners, who they saw perhaps as victims of this war as well. The bracelets meant a great deal in terms of their value, in terms of the sense of unity and the volume of people who became aware of the situation over time and who cared enough to take a step and display every day their caring for one particular individual. Those bracelets would later be returned to the prisoners, and our home was flooded with them. Those bracelets would later be returned after the men came home to the families, and our family was flooded with them. In fact, we wound up with boxes full of bracelets. It was humbling to realize that so many people shit. Never done this one before. It was humbling to realize that so many people had carried Dad with them on their wrist for a period of years before he came home. Okay, can you get some, you get something out of that?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
Okay.
In brief, the words that are on that bracelet down there are something not forgotten. What was the?
I don't know.
I think it's we are not forgotten.
You were not forgotten? Does it say you or? I don't know. I don't know what it's.
I think it's we are not forgotten.
You were, is it,
It's
I
on the
mean,
POWMIA flag as well, the same words.
I hate that flag. No, Mom and I saw that.
I just want to get that.
No, I understand. I
It's
know.
not
It doesn't
forgotten.
matter what I think of it.
Because if I show the words, I want.
I think it's you are not forgotten.
You are not
We can
forgotten.
shoot it both ways,
Yeah.
okay? All right?
I just want to hear you saying those words because I could put that into the edit when I'm walking.
Okay, all right,
When I'm-
okay.
The viewer will read those words on that bracelet and you will be walking through. I just want to hear it in your mind.
I got you, okay.
Okay.
The-
What does it mean, you are not forgotten?
The bracelets, in many ways, said, "You are not forgotten." Let me try it again. The bracelets, in many ways, say, the bracelets, in many ways, said, "You are not forgotten. You are remembered. Your sacrifice is honored. Your sacrifice is honored, and we as a country honor your service during difficult days." But, I mean,
That's great.
Now, if you want me to, I think that's what it said. I think it's you or not. I mean, I
think
can
it's you
say,
are not forgotten.
"We are not
Absolutely.
forgotten"
No,
or
it's
something.
you are not
Yeah, I
forgotten.
think so.
I think that's, and that you captured the essence of it. That's
Okay,
great.
all right.
You were not forgotten.
Mom and I really, when we saw the pattern for that flag, we were both just crestfallen because it showed it was just it's a depiction of a World War II prisoner tower and a guy looking down, a silhouette looking down in discouragement. And Mom and I we didn't like that. We did not,
Yeah,
we both sat there in the
exactly.
dining room and said, no,
Yes,
that's
yeah.
not right.
Um,
Sorry. That was-
Oh,
For what
okay,
it's worth.
here's the thing I want to touch on.
These are film outtakes.
Um, as your father's son, as the member of your mother and father's family, as with your brothers and everything else, you have a rare insight into the warrior's return. Do you, in looking back on it now, see things that your father needed you might not have understood then in helping him to come home? Like, this had to be a huge shock. For how many years was your dad in? 8 years?
7.5.
7.5 years.
Yeah.
7.5 years of mostly unlit cells, mostly incarceration and torture, all this other stuff. To be able to decide you're gonna walk out the back door and watch the sunset. Massive. You've gone from zero stimulation on some level to incredible possibility and freedom. Freedom takes on new meaning. The freedom to love your family, to say goodnight to your sons, all these things. And in a very natural way, you all had your own needs. Dad is home, right?
Yeah.
In looking back on it now, and this is genuinely a question, not a leading question, it's a question, because one of the things is that we're asking the question is, in examining PTSD, there oftentimes warriors returning home feel isolated. Like those around them don't understand what they need. Maybe you can tell us something about the warrior's need and the family's need, perhaps, whatever it is. I don't know. I'm asking.
That's a tricky one because they're very proud of the fact that because of the sense of community, Patrick, that they say, that, I don't know whether it's true or not, but the prisoners say not one case of PTSD because they were unified and together. I'm not sure that's true.
Well, the metrics are astounding. I'm actually not thinking in terms of the Vietnam vets here,
All right.
the Hanoi, but this is also.
I see. So generically, the return of the warrior from the field of battle to his family.
What can we learn from what you experienced to tell future generations? Because now we are getting a lot of PTSD, and there's a breakdown. There's something that's not happening in the battlefield that happened for your dad. And there's something that's not happening in the return that happened for your dad.
Okay.
And again, this is a question.
Yeah. I mean, I'll try to
Did you
try to bring it around a
as
little.
his son, did you ever look at your dad or look back years later and think, oh, that's what he meant. What he just needed, like when he just said, I just need to be quiet right now. Oh, I don't know. I'm just fishing here.
Yeah. I can't, that was, in my conscious, I mean, there may be something I've sublimated, but I don't think so.
Was there
Let me try it this way, okay? All right? When Dad returned home, we all had to resume our regular roles in the family 7.5 years later. That presents its own set of challenges, along with the challenges that come from one member of the family, the most revered, having spent 7.5 years of deprivation. Because of the spirit of community that was conjured among the prisoners in Hanoi, because of their sense of unity over self, very few, if any, exhibited signs of post-traumatic stress syndrome. In fact, many have gone above and beyond and have been studied for a phenomenon known as post-traumatic growth. But the opportunity to build community, to build a sense of appreciation for one another and an appreciation for the fighting man or woman is not always possible on the field of battle. And today our nation faces a challenge in meeting the needs of people who in essence have become the prisoners of their own experience as combat personnel. We owe those people every bit of service and every bit of recovery that we can provide because they have given in ultimate ways parts of their lives that stay on the battlefield, that create a sense of loneliness, that in some heartless way deprive them of the emotion that they can show to their children or their spouses upon return. I know that the prisoner community is supportive of all efforts to, in many ways, support the American fighting man and woman as they return from these battles and want to be able to supply the hope and the generous feelings of welcome and the sense of appreciation that they experienced as prisoners when they came home.
And then I wanted to
Stumble around a
if
little.
I can, there's most of us in the lay world look upon the prison experience in the Hanoi prison systems as surviving. But these men introduced a kind of new notion, not just surviving, but thriving. I'd like to, if you can, get those words into a sentence
Okay,
that makes sense in terms of your
yeah.
experience of your dad.
Right. In 1969, there was a transition in prisoner behavior in the Hanoi prison system. The Politburo passed a regulation that minimized the use of torture and isolation, mostly because those methods had not provided the propaganda that the Politburo had hoped it might generate. At that point, the prisoners were afforded the opportunity to live with one another, still with difficult diets and still with problems and with medical needs that remain unattended. But they had the comradeship of one another, and they moved as a population, as individuals, from men who had been surviving to those who could find ways to thrive. Men who hadn't seen one another for years but had communicated through walls became close as they hugged one another in the middle of rooms and realized who they had been speaking to. These men, in many ways, thrived because they had the generous love of one another. And I've lost where I'm going. Sorry.
No problem. You got
In many ways, let me just say this. I think our family was the luckiest and most fortunate among those who welcomed former prisoners back into the United States. My family's love and dedication to Dad and to what he was standing for remained strong during the entire time he was gone. That's not to say that there weren't times when we disagreed with the United States policies or when we found the military lacking in some of its responsiveness. Those things happen in war, and you have to learn to accept them. But in many ways, we were able not just to withstand the re-entry process, as it was called, but we found ways that we could stand together. In my case, I had the good fortune of welcoming Odysseus home. And as Dad was our Odysseus, I'm very content with my role as his Telemachus, the son who waited and who tried to keep things at home as consistent and as loving as possible. Not every family with military servants in it has the ability or the opportunity to serve and to find their way into that sort of a configuration. Very few military families have the opportunity to find those roles and to thrive after an ordeal of combat in the way ours did. It wasn't so much, I don't know, I'm just blah, 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 blah. Sorry.
Now,
It may or may not have made any sense at all.
I feel like I've got the core of what I was looking for, and this is just me coming up with what I come up with. So
Okay.
before we end, I'd like to throw it over to you. You've already done a couple of things here that are exactly what I was asking for. When you put that in, what you've done, where you've spoke directly to the midshipmen about leadership and things like that. But based on your experience, Jim, based on your history, and are there things you would like to say to future leaders here, or things you would like me to touch on, or you would like to touch on that I haven't?
Well, I just want to be careful that I don't make something up here on the spot, given the opportunity to perform. I have always thought of it as an honor to work with young people and to help them grow in ways And then later in life, I've had the good fortune to watch them flourish. I think the life of a teacher is unique in as much as we so often plant seeds to a harvest. Oh, in as much as we plant seeds to a crop that we never see harvested. In the Navy, you get to see the growth and the determination of young men and women who make it a life's work. And I couldn't be more proud than to be some very small part, on Dad's behalf or on my own, to participate in a project that helps you hear the wisdom of others so that you might be a better sailor in the long term. That's all right.
Let me ask you one other question, if I can.
Sure, I'm sorry. I was going to go somewhere with that, and it flew away.
Was there ever a
Oh,
point,
sorry, shouldn't touch that.
Was there ever a point where, like, you had all this experience? I sort of want to get at the heart of what it's like to be James Stockdale's son. He's this larger-than-life legend. He was this man who was crushed and diminished by outside forces, yet rose through them. And he was your friend and your father and a confidant and someone you would go and get advice from, whatever. Was there ever a point where you saw the price, perhaps, that he paid to be who he was?
Yeah, you're coming at that a different way, a separate time. There at the end, I didn't know, but I really felt as though, I don't know how to get to this. You know, when the first time I heard about CTE, Dad's deterioration was not typical, but I'd be hard pressed to validate that. You know, I really don't have any sob story about Dad. He and I were so, we had such a good time together. And because you're a kid in a military family, let me put it this way. When I was 7 years old and we were living on Brentwood Street and Dad was in VF 211, there were times when he would take me out and put me in his junk car and we would go out to Moffett Field. There would be other pilots there because the new model of the F-8 had been flown in from Dallas, and some of the other pilots were going up in the air to do touch and goes. And as a kid, I was told that I could ride in the Jeep out onto the tarmac, and I would get out of the Jeep and it was put up on its hood, and I could sit there and I could watch these ferocious jets come down and just touch the tarmac and then take off, as fellow pilots with my father watched it. As a child, that was exhilarating. It was a wonderful experience, and the fact that I got to share it built bonds with Dad that I know I never ever could have hoped for had I grown up elsewhere or in a different environment. Dad and I became friends over time because when you're the child of someone who loves you, who is in the military, and you move every couple of years, you have to find a friend who is consistent across time. And Dad was my friend. He was the one who I always came back to and always knew would be there for me, even during the time that he was in prison. He proved inspirational.
Great.
Yeah.
The very last
Have
thing.
we run out of tape? I thought I saw some lights flashing.
One very last thing. The name of this project is Return with Honor.
Yeah.
If you could, I assume you feel, as most of the nation does, and certainly I do, that your father not only returned to his country, but he returned to his family, and he returned to his service with honor. If you could make some kind of statement about that from your perspective.
Sure.
Grab focus real quick, sir.
Tell me when you're ready.
Can I get you to look at Patrick for 1 second? Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Return with honor. It's a phrase. It has special meaning for my family and for many families. But return with honor is something that you try to do every day. Return with honor is what you tell your adolescent son and daughter when they're tempted by their peer group to do something that they know they shouldn't. Return with honor is something that you do when in your workplace you're tempted to cut corners or to find a way to help your family at the expense of others. Return with honor means that in your service to the community, you find ways that help others and that don't serve your needs for praise. Return with honor is what this country is built on. Return with honor from war, return with honor from a day well spent at work, return with honor from any worthwhile pursuit is what this film and these films can stand for. Returning every day to your kitchen table with honor and knowing that you haven't done anything that might discredit your family or your country is what we're trying to exemplify here. I'm sorry, I'm losing it. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's great.
Sort of
That's
that thing?
fantastic. Yes.
Sort of thing?
Well, also that I would imagine, I don't know, I'm like a little kid in awe of your father, that I just admire that he returned with honor. You know what I mean? Like, it's moving to me that there are those warriors who have gone out and carried the best of who we are and lived that every day. And that when through you, I get a chance to brush up against greatness. You know?
Well, I don't feel like I communicate it very well sometimes, but he was it's hard for me to see him like that, Patrick, in all fairness, Dad had this special capacity to strip the formality out of any situation at a moment's notice. He could make a wry remark or say something that seemed a little bit offbeat that let you know, hey, it's just you and me here. And that's all that matters. Are we together on this? I think we are. I'm just checking it out with you. A moment like that, as a son, as a father, as a child, as a parent, is something that creates such a connection and such a sense of obligation to one another that love takes on an entirely new meaning. I was really fortunate to grow up with a dad who, in many ways, never took his medals or never took his military conquests as seriously as he took his responsibilities, as he took in his responsibilities to his family. I'm running out of gas
I'm
here.
done.
I've got too many platitudes.
Let's cut.
Okay.
Wait.